Okay, good morning, everyone. It is right at 10 a.m., so I'm going to give everyone about another minute or so to join the call, and then we will get started. Right now, you are in listen-only mode, so if you have any questions or comments that you want us to see, can you please send it in the questions box, and that will guarantee that I can see the message. So just hang tight for about another minute or so. Thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Elizabeth Keating, and we are here today, here today for our WSC Professional Development webinar on emergency preparedness and lessons learned from Hurricane Michael. Before we get started, I just wanted to give everyone some reminders that during the presentation, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you are in listen-only mode. So to get those messages to us, if you look on your GoToWebinar call panel, you should have a box that's either minimized or expanded, depending on your settings, but it's a box that says questions. Go ahead and send those messages through that questions box. They will come directly to me, and we will be able to review them. If we have time at the end of the call, we will try to go through some of those questions. If we don't have time, I will compile all the questions and we will create a Q&A handout that is posted on the APD website for review. There are also 2 handouts today. So if you look on your call menu bar under the handouts tab, you should have 2 attachments. One is the slide presentation, and the other is our suggested personal disaster plan. And those are for you to use. The presentation will also be posted on the website with the recording of this training, and the suggested personal disaster plan is already up on our APD website, so you can always refer back to that as well. As we always do, there's an assessment at the end of this training. We will give you that link, and you have until 5 o'clock this evening to complete that assessment. There are 8 questions. To receive your 1.5 in-service credits, you'll need to have 6 or more questions answered correctly. If you get 5 or less, then you will not earn credit for this training. The assessment is only open until 5 o'clock and it does not reopen. So please make sure you take time this afternoon to complete that assessment. It should take you no more than a few minutes and you will receive a certificate at the completion of that assessment. So without further ado, I am here with Karen Hagan and Linda Donor. They are going to break up this presentation in 2 parts. Karen will be speaking on the emergency preparedness section, and Linda will be speaking on lessons learned from Hurricane Michael. And with that, I'll pass it over to Karen.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and happy Friday, everybody. We are sitting in the middle of hurricane season, so I think that this is quite an opportune time to have this session this morning. Our first slide, if you would advance it, Elizabeth. Keep going. Okay, so this slide, you know, it's entitled Emergency Preparedness Applies to Everyone, but I need to say that, you know, no matter where anyone lives or what anyone does, rich, poor, young, old, the individuals highlighted on the slide, disasters and emergencies really level the playing field because disasters know no boundaries. However, we all know that vulnerable individuals are affected differently and have the greatest challenge with recovering from a disaster. And how we plan, how much we plan, affects our ability and the people we serve's ability to recover by 100%. I think that WSCs and caregivers especially are challenged because first and foremost, you have to think about your own preparedness and your family's preparedness, because if you yourself and your family are not prepared, there is no way you're going to be able to assist your clients and those that you serve. So always personal preparedness is so very important to be able to assist those we serve with their own emergency preparedness. Next slide. Obviously, and everybody has a very personal story when they think about the impacts of disaster. Whether, you know, Linda's going to be talking about the, you know, lessons learned from Hurricane Michael, but, you know, this state, living in Florida, we have surely had our shares, and we will never hear all of the stories about how disasters have impacted us, our families, and our clients that we serve. So it's really critical that we manage the expectations of our clients. Now let's talk about that for a second. You know, as some of our clients, many of them have experienced disasters, but some of them have not, and some of them don't recall. And so it's critical that we manage those expectations. It can make the difference truly in their survival. And, you know, there's things that we can do, and we're going to be talking about that today. One is you know, helping our clients build their own Go Kit, you know, and, you know, that Go Kit would include all of their favorite items and supplies. But we have to talk about the reality with them, about what to expect. So managing expectations is really, really important. I know that Elizabeth has as one of the attachments the personal disaster plan, and really the critical success factors of that plan is one, it's a conversation for possibilities, which you would have with each and every one of your clients. It also, by really, really digging into that personal disaster plan, it will manage expectations. So depending on where someone lives and depending upon the potential impacts, you can have really good conversations that will make the difference in some cases between life and death. So as you can see on this particular slide, in every disaster, if you've seen one disaster, you've seen one disaster. Every disaster is different, big or small, regardless of the location. Every single one is different, and we will talk about that in a few minutes. So the impacts, there may or may not be food, water, or sheltering. You know, there may or may not be power disruption. there may or may not be mobility limitations. So as you can see, these are just some of the factors that would impact people depending upon the nature of any given disaster. Next slide. You know, some disasters, you know, you will see a loss of home-based services. Some people might be isolated. There may be diminished natural supports. I think Linda's going to be talking about the results of Hurricane Michael, and that particular one about diminished natural supports will come into play. The increased risks with interruption of medical care, a very, very critical thing that we talk about. People may or may not get back into their homes more quickly. In some cases, they will not be able to. Examples of, you know, very often we lose power, as you know. Just teaching the people that we serve about how to use a flashlight and putting batteries, you know, into that flashlight and talking to them about where their flashlight or flashlights should be kept in their homes. Just those very, very practical conversations will make a huge difference. You know, in the personal disaster plan, you know, writing down everything that your client needs, letting them know how important that is, because, you know, after an emergency, their providers may change depending upon the availability of resources. Okay, next slide. I think it's important that you as waiver support coordinators understand the emergency management cycle. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I can tell you that this cycle is universal. It is followed around the world, around our country, in our state, in every county, in every community. Because in various, you know, at various locations, there's going to be preparedness, which is what we're doing now. There's going to be planning for response. There's going to be elements of recovery. And then mitigation really can make the difference between whether or not a home survives, et cetera, and how well prepared we are. So I just think it's important that you understand that when we talk about the emergency management cycle, almost everything that we're doing, you know, is part and parcel of this in order to survive emergencies. Next slide. This is also really important because, you know, as I said before, if you've seen one disaster, you've seen one disaster. You know, a lot of folks will say all disasters are local because they usually start locally. They do start locally. And we bring to bear the local resources first. They have to be brought to bear first. You know, one of the things, because Florida is such a high-risk state, our local responders, our local emergency management offices, our local Department of Health offices, et cetera, spend time year-round being prepared for the disasters that they believe could affect the citizens who reside in their local communities. Same goes with the state and federal government. Depending upon the scope of the disaster, available resources will be there. You know, there might be local disaster resources, state disasters, and in some cases, federal disasters. FEMA does not respond to all disasters. If it's not large enough for a presidential declaration, then you're not going to see FEMA. And an example of that, and we've seen it during Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Michael, for example, is we saw TSA, which is the Transitional Shelter Assistance Program. That's the program where, because we had a federal disaster declaration, the TSA program, which is a FEMA program, was instituted. And what that is, that's that short-term lodging assistance. That's where those hotels became available and were paid for by the federal government. But that's only going to occur when individuals are unable to return home for an extended period of time following a disaster. Maybe because their home is damaged or inaccessible, but that is usually community-wide because of the scope of the disaster. That will not happen in every single disaster. In the state of Florida, we saw it happen 2 years in a row, but that will not and does not always happen. It depends on the scope of the emergency itself. And I think that's really important. And one of the things that APD tries to do for our waiver support coordinators, all of our providers, and our clients is keep up to date with what resources will be available. And we're going to talk a little bit later about our recovery toolkit. But we stay on top of this so that you will know what resources will be available, and you can communicate that in turn to your clients and for your sake too. Because again, we're all sitting here together in a very vulnerable state. So it might affect your clients and it might affect you, but it's important that you know this for your family as well. Okay, next slide. Obviously, we're talking about how important preparedness is. And I mean, I think you know this, you know, how important it is that you develop a personal plan, you work with your client on their personal disaster plan, that we put together our own go kits, that we help our clients put together their go kit. And you know, the kinds of things that we want to make sure are in your kits are, you know, you want to change your clothing. You want to make sure you don't forget your glasses. You want to make sure you have, you know, hearing aids if that's one of the things that your clients need to have. And that all of these things are thought through and put on a list, because in the midst of an emergency, you don't want to have to think about that. You want to think about that now. You want to make sure that you've got either a waterproof container or you know me, I love my Ziploc bags that I use to hold copies of identification and emergency documents. You want to make sure that you have a 7 or more day supply of medication. You know, for the longest time, we talk about just let's get prepared for 3 days, but I think Linda will tell you that we might consider having medicines and other things for and water for more than 3 days, depending upon the nature of the emergency. You want to make sure that you've got the sanitary supplies, toilet paper, hand sanitizer, garbage bags, things that will make your life a little bit better, diapers, you know, those kinds of things. So I think that's really important when we think about preparedness, because it really does minimize the risk and confusion, especially for our clients. Sometimes you can even make it fun, you know, sitting with your client and say, okay, we're gonna test your flashlight today. Remember we talked about putting batteries in. Show us where your flashlight is and let me see how you can put a battery in it. I mean, I really think that preparedness is a way that we can help our clients be prepared, and it's a really good way to show them how much we care about them. Okay, next. Response, you know, this is what's really important for you and for your clients. Listen to the authorities. Not everybody has to evacuate. You know, the best thing is if we could stay in our homes, you know, and we don't have to evacuate. But if the call is to evacuate, we need to heed that advice. So sheltering in place is many times the best option, but it's not always, you know, the best option. You see on that, the last bullet, the state information line, that's going to change disaster by disaster. And we're going to help you know what that phone number is. And sometimes it's an 800 number where people can call and say, where do I find this? And they look at resources around the state. So there's a lot of leaning forward on the part of local, state, and federal government and the state agencies and your local community. Again, this really has a lot to do with managing expectations. When you think about where you live, where your clients live, if they live on the bank of a river, they need to know that that river might flood. If they live on the beach, they need to know that chances are they're going to have to evacuate. If they live near an airport, there could be a transportation accident or rail. So it's important to know the kinds of disasters that or emergencies that could befall you and your clients. Next slide. When we talk about recovery, I know this slide shows big FEMA, but as I said before, if we don't have a presidential declaration, FEMA's not going to be there with those resources. However, there will be, if it's large enough, the pods, that's not a FEMA program, that is a state of Florida program. It's a point of distribution. If the stores are down, they're closed, we need points of distribution to hand out, say, water. And it's important that you know and that you let your clients know if there's a pod to go up to and get water. Again, that's why being aware and having that radio with the batteries. And if you can't see TV, making sure you listen to that radio and know what's going on. But a lot of the services listed here you will get from your local community or your state government. Next slide. Mitigation, and this is the last of the emergency management cycle. But what mitigation really is, it's being educated. It's knowing where the flood zones are. It's knowing what your evacuation resources are. And I'm going to show you a slide where in any given community you can go and say, where's the evacuation routes? It's having informed decisions about where and how you live. It's making sure that your home is as resilient as possible, knowing what the essentials are. And this is where multi-hazard planning is so important as well. Okay, we're going to stop the cycle of emergency management. Got it. We can't talk about emergencies without talking about sheltering. So one thing I just want to share about sheltering, we have general population shelters around the state. They're usually the schools because from a hurricane perspective, they are the buildings that are hardened that might save lives. It is a last resort. We call it a lifeboat. It is not where you want your clients to go. It really, really isn't. Basic first aid at best. It's hot, it's crowded, it's noisy. Depending on the nature of the disaster, there is going to be very limited food and very, limited comforts. I wanted to compare these two next storms. Hurricane Irma, this was interesting. There were 700 shelters open in Hurricane Irma because it was so massive. It affected the state greatly. And there were 192,000 people in those shelters. But the damage that Hurricane Irma caused was minimal compared to the damage in a much smaller area that Hurricane Michael caused to the individuals that were affected. So there's the comparison. There were only 44 shelters open in Hurricane Michael, and there were only 6,500 people sheltered. But the devastation to the people who were affected by Hurricane Michael was much, much greater than Hurricane Irma because, of course, it was a larger, more compact, more dangerous storm. And then there's a link at the bottom of that if you want to look and to really see where all of the shelters are, the general population shelters are. So next slide. Special needs shelters, this should also not be the first option. Please do not think that if you register your client for a special needs shelter 5 years ago that they're registered. It's an annual registration, and you register by your county emergency management website, or there's also a state emergency management website. They feed into each other, and the link to that is on the bottom, is on this slide. That is the link. There is limited capacity, and not all special needs shelters have the same resources. There are some counties that just do not have the resources that other counties do. And so when you register one of your clients for a special needs shelter, if that county does not have the resources, after you've put in all of the needs your client has, if that county doesn't have those resources, they're going to say they really can't come to this special needs shelter. We are not going to be able to take care of them. The other requirement of a special needs shelter is that a caregiver go with the individual. They do not have a bank of people who can, provide services, especially to our population. It's very, as you know better than anyone, how unique the needs are and individualized the needs are of our clients. Okay. And there are sheltering alternatives. As I said before, if someone can shelter in place and it's safe to do so, it really is the shelter of choice. Or a host home, going to a relative, a friend, going to another, say if they're in a group home, going to a group home of like individuals. Those are always the best alternatives for our clients. As you know, it combines resources. There's better support to them. And I know how, you folks go above and beyond to care for your clients. But really the answer to every single person's disaster and disaster survival is very, very personal and very, very individualized. Right, I'm moving on. Let's talk about evacuation. Evacuation it's something where when we think about our clients, we need to go, if we do have to evacuate, we want to go early. It is not pretty. I'm sure many of you, if you have ever had to evacuate, have got caught in something that looks like this picture on the slide. Well before a disaster occurs, get your tank filled up with gas. Make sure you have cash. There's sometimes a lack of hotels. I'm sure Linda's going to talk about that. Know where you're going. That conversation about, do you have a relative in Atlanta? Is there someone where you could just make the call and say, if I have to leave Florida, can I come to you? Can I just stay there with you? We saw wonderful examples of heroism and people opening their homes, whether they were a friend, whether they were a relative, whether it was a waiver support coordinator, opening their homes to people who had no other place to go. It really does get back to that very first slide that shows that, disasters know no boundaries and that we're in this together. We spend year-round preparing for disasters at APD. We have a comprehensive emergency management plan. We talk about what are our mission essential functions, who are the staff that are over those mission essential functions, so that we can, in the event of a disaster in any place in the state, keep going as much as absolutely possible. Where might we have to go and carry on APD business, and that's the COOP, the Continuity of Operations Plan. We have an identified incident management team who make sure that we bring all the information to bear, that we make the best right decisions, that we're listening to you as our providers about what's happening, that those individual emergency situations, but we have to hear from you in the midst of an emergency. We have to know what is happening so that we can work together with our designated representatives of the State Emergency Operations Center. I cannot tell you how important that is. We have people seated at that State Emergency Operations Center. They're sitting there with all the other state agencies, FEMA when FEMA is involved. And when you tell us of a certain type of an emergency that is beyond your control to help fix, we bring it to their attention and try our best, along with the state emergency response team, to address those issues. Communication is so very important, and we try to communicate in a multitude of ways. We keep our recovery toolkit up to date year round. We send out emails. We utilize Everbridge, which is an emergency notification system. We do everything in our power to provide you with information so that you in turn can provide it to your clients, and also help you yourself if you're affected by an emergency. Next slide. Of course, we are gathering information. We have daily situation reports that we get from our regional offices about the status of our licensed home, those in supportive living and independent living. We have many, as you know, clients in the family home. And we have people in group homes. And so we really are sharing information very aggressively every single day, well before the disaster and leading up to it, during, and after the disaster. Next slide. We have daily calls, 7 days a week, usually twice a day. We involve FEMA, if FEMA is involved, to help us understand what it is they're bringing to bear. Because remember, not all FEMA programs in a presidential declaration are brought to bear in every disaster. And that's why answering the question of what are the resources that are available? You know, and it could be as local as, is there a curfew in place? And we now have a letter so that you can get a letter and so that you can go see your clients if there's a curfew in place in your local community, because that does happen. And you know, it's because it's for safety reasons that that occurs. But we do have providers who need to get to see their clients. And so that's available. We try to get the associations, the Waiver Support Coordinator associations involved in some of our calls so that we can educate them and answer questions. And so we've got, as we said before, 24/7 participation at the State Emergency Operations Center. Very important role. Here's the resources I was telling you about. FloridaDisaster.org, that's the state emergency management website, always up, you know, hopefully always up to date. We'll have information even now on preparedness. They've got some great preparedness resources. Our recovery toolkit, that's how to get the data. I talked about Everbridge and how we utilize that. We are communicating with our state and local emergency managers, all, you know, ongoing. We share the news releases from the governors. When the governor puts together news releases, it's really great information. We try to get it out to you because it's all about what's happening every single day, what resources are available. It's great information. The plan, obviously, it's a living document. It's so important for you to have your own personal plan and that you work with your clients to have their plan. And then, of course, when you practice the plan, when you the more we practice, the more less risk we are at, and the more we can help our clients get through a disaster. So thank you for listening to me through all of this. And I think that, you know, Linda Donor is going to be able to bring this home for you and share her experiences from Hurricane Michael. So Linda, I'm going to toss this over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. We learned that storms can intensify rapidly. Michael started out as a weak tropical system in the Western Caribbean, just off the Yucatan. By October 7th, it was a tropical depression. The very next day, Michael became a hurricane, and it took only 2 more days to intensify into a major hurricane, and the rest is history. I'm here in the Northwest region. The Northwest region encompasses a large geographic area that includes 16 counties in the Florida Panhandle. The region is divided east and west by the Apalachicola River. The counties to the east of the Apalachicola and Gulf County are in the eastern time zone, and the other 9 remaining counties are in the western part of the region, and we're in the central time zone. The primary lesson that we learned from Michael is to minimize risk ahead of time by developing a good plan. It's important to stay connected to your local news stations so that you can stay on top of all of the developments of the storm. It's important to educate the individuals that you serve on how they too should stay connected by listening to local radio and local TV. It's important that when you do the annual supported living, the disaster plan for individuals, that you really take the time to go through those very thoroughly. I was a supported living coach for over 12 years, and I assisted individuals with developing their personal plans. Having experienced Hurricane Michael, I want to share with you some lessons that I learned that I hope that you can use to enhance future planning, or even go back and modify the current plans if that's necessary. On some disaster plans, it's common to see that individuals' plans for sheltering will have a comment that says, "to be determined." To be determined is not a good plan. It's very important that when you sit down with individuals to develop their disaster plans, that you have conversations about where they will go if they're not able to stay in their homes due to the disaster. You want to look at it in two different parts. Where will they go if they remain in their immediate area? And where will they go if they're not able to stay there and they have to go outside the area? And that ties into what Karen was saying about the importance of calling relatives that don't live in the immediate area and asking them if they will be an alternative shelter in the time of need. Understanding that there's a lot that goes with that in terms of how will the individual get there. But really, when developing the personal disaster plan, try to avoid the comment on the plan for where you will shelter being "to be determined." One of the things that is really important is that individuals take the time whenever an immediate disaster notification has come out to make sure that they have all of the medications and the medical supplies that they require. Make sure that they have those in hand. It will be important to contact the pharmacy to try to obtain a prescription refill early. A good thing to do is to, when you get those prescriptions filled, most of the pharmacies will give you an insert that has information about the prescription and so forth. It's a really good idea to hang on to those, to put those in a plastic bag, because the prescription numbers on those labels can be used if you have to refill that medication at a different pharmacy. We learned that in terms of the pharmacies, that individuals, like if you're using a local pharmacy that's not a part of a chain, then it's going to be more difficult to get a refill from a different pharmacy. If your regular pharmacy is part of a chain like CVS or Walgreens or Walmart, then it will be easy to have a prescription transferred to another location. Say if you're in Panama City and you have to evacuate to Dothan, Alabama, and your pharmacy is CVS, then it won't be, it will be very easy to get that prescription filled. It's important to check the consumable supplies, especially if you have diapers and wipes and things of that nature, because those items are usually purchased in bulk and or ordered where they're shipped monthly or every 3 months, depending on the cycle that you're on. You want to make sure that that the individual has an adequate supply, and the same for medical equipment like breathing machines, oxygen, CPAPs, things like that. You want to check those and make sure that they're operating properly. Some of them require things like changing filters and or even changing out masks. So in advance, you want to check that equipment and make sure that it is that it's in good working order. Another thing that we experienced after Hurricane Michael was that the healthcare services were impacted. Our local hospitals were, one of them actually shut down. There was such significant damage to it. We were down to one hospital that was partially operating. Doctors' offices were not able to operate. Pharmacies were closed, clinics, home health care services, all of these regular services that we were accustomed to became limited or void. You have to be prepared to assist individuals to seek healthcare services outside of their local area. And a really good way to do that is to, when you're doing the disaster preparedness planning with the supported living coach and the individual, develop a tool that will allow the individual to have a compact profile, something that lists their diagnoses, their medications, allergies, and any significant information related to their health. It's also a good idea when you're having the quarterly meetings that you review that list and update it. What you can do is to take that list, place it in a Ziploc bag, and put it in the individual's go bag. That way they will not have to worry about trying to remember what are my medications if they have to go to a new doctor, a new hospital. That information is going to be readily available to them. After Hurricane Michael, there were some free healthcare services sites that were established. And it's important to talk with individuals ahead of time and explain to them that these services are there, but they are more of a first aid type service. It's available, but it's not going to be where if they have a serious injury or something that they would go to. However, if they are in need of additional first aid supplies, if they have an injury, say like a cut, and it doesn't look right, that would be a good location, a good resource for them, is accessing those free healthcare services. Another lesson we learned was that mobility will be limited. There were down power lines, trees, roofs from houses, damaged vehicles that covered the roadways. And it made it very difficult for anyone to be able to move about throughout the city and even in their immediate area. Like Karen said, in advance, you want to make sure that your vehicle is full with gasoline, because after the hurricane, the supply of gasoline was limited. And even when you went to purchase gasoline, the lines were very long. It could take hours for you to be able to get gas. And when you did get to the pump, you were limited to 5 gallons. That makes you have to be really mindful of the kind of traveling that you're going to be doing, and kind of plan ahead. If you have consumers in a specific area that you want to go check on, then you'll want to kind of plan your route so that you can utilize that gasoline effectively. It's important to explain to individuals that even walking and riding a bicycle was limited, and it was because of for safety reasons. There was so much debris. There were, even visually, it was difficult to identify familiar areas. The road signs were down. The familiar structures that one would use to identify locations did not look the same. And like I said, the power lines being down, debris everywhere, trees in the road, really created a massive safety issue. And that was one of the reasons why we were under strict curfew for several days. And it was enforced. And going back to what Karen said, the agency does provide a letter for providers to be able to access to roadways after the curfew if there is a need to check on consumers. That curfew is strictly enforced, and it's not that they're trying to be mean or anything, but the responders can see things that you may not be able to see because of your immediate surroundings might not really show the extent of the safety risk that you could encounter. Oh, Elizabeth?
Yeah, just go back to the PowerPoint. Just don't click the pictures.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry about that. Okay. Another lesson that we learned was that natural supports are a great resource. It's important to assist individuals to develop relationships with good neighbors who can support them while they shelter in place. I know a lot of the disaster plans for individuals will indicate that their plan is to stay at home. And that's good if your home has not been damaged and you're able to do that. But having developed a relationship with a neighbor, it just tends to, it lends and provides some additional support, because you as a waiver support coordinator may not be able to get to the individual, and they're going to feel so much more at ease by seeing a familiar face. And if that familiar face can be someone that lives on the, next door or across the street or something, it's going to be really good. These natural supports can provide a lot of assistance. The supporters can share recovery information. They can provide access to meal sites and distribution centers. They can also just be a companion. It's important that waiver support coordinators and other providers encourage individuals to develop the natural support relationships on an ongoing basis. And this can be not only the neighbors, but it can be co-workers if they're working. It can be even their boss, or it could be another waiver support coordinator, because I know that that there are waiver support agencies, and so you have a backup person. So it would be important to explain that ahead of time to individuals. Let them know, hey, if I'm not available, then my coworker, this other waiver support coordinator, may be able to, come and check on you.
Linda, I just wanted to mention to you and the rest of the group on the call that we have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
So if the support coordinators, if any of you have questions that you want to make sure that we address in the Q&A handout afterwards, go ahead and start sending those in the questions box while Linda finishes up her part of her slides.
Another lesson we learned was that an evacuation plan to stay at a hotel will likely change. A lot of people on their disaster plans will indicate that they're going to go to a hotel, and that's fine. But remember that you've also got to make plans for paying for that service. It can be really expensive. It's also going to depend on other people, and the hotels fill up really fast. If you are going to list a hotel on a disaster plan, make sure that the name of the hotel, the address, the contact phone number, and things of that nature are on the plan. Access to cash will be limited. Access to banking after the storm was void for days, and when it did resume, the lines were long and withdrawals amount were limited. I experienced having fraudulent activity on my account 2 times, which delayed access to my funds even longer. Some purchase transactions like food, gasoline, and other supplies were cash only due to the lack of power in the stores. So it's important to discover alternatives before a storm, like traveler's checks, rolled coins, selecting banks with locations in other cities, like up here, Regions has locations in Alabama and various cities in Florida. Purchase store gift cards like Walmart, Dollar General, to be used during away evacuations and post-disaster. Consider making a substantial cash withdrawal early if it's appropriate for the individual. Also assist individuals in supported living to explore rental insurance. This can provide funding for shelter, post-disaster, and replacement of their personal belongings. Supply distribution processes vary. Some sites require ID, others don't. Some sites give out prepared boxes of items. Others allow you to make your own selection. Some sites have a limit on certain items you can get, and some sites require you to sign up for distribution by completing forms for their tracking. All of this can change from one day to another, and the lines will be long. Even when stores are back operational, supplies will be limited. Lines will be long, and the amount you can purchase at one time will be limited. The presence of first responders, authority, military personnel is welcome, but a little scary. Educate consumers that there will be an array of strangers, first responders in all kinds of uniforms and vehicles. They carry weapons and strange looking gear. There will be helicopters, drones, and night patrolmen. Responders can come through asking a lot of questions all day long. It may be necessary for them to even come into your house, walk your property, or ask you the same questions over and over. Some responders will be tasked with spray painting information on your home or taping signs during the recovery process. Communication with the outside world is key. Having a solar or a battery operated radio is key to staying informed about what's going on in your area. Radio stations provided up-to-date, vital recovery information. Access to cell phones, electronic files, and folders will be impacted. It's best to keep a copy of significant information in paper form in a waterproof container. Assist individuals to purchase and learn how to operate battery and solar equipment. Provide training in meal planning using non-perishable foods to ensure that a little goes a long way. Provide training on how to maintain hygiene needs with limited or no water supply. Train on ways to meet basic needs without the conveniences of everyday living. There are sites set up to provide free showers and free laundry services. Make individuals aware of how their daily routine will be impacted. There will be no ADT, there will be no work, no internet, no cell phone, no transportation, no lights, no water. Let them know what to expect. The availability of providers will be impacted. Some direct care staff who are personally impacted may not be able to provide regularly scheduled services. Residential facilities, ADT, provider agencies, if affected in areas, will be unable to operate due to property destruction or lack of staff. This void will require the teamwork and creativity by all the providers to ensure health and safety needs are maintained. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. That was really great. Since we are at the end of our time, I just wanted to let everyone know how to access their assessment. We received a few questions, which we will address those in the Q&A document that will be posted online. But for today, this is your test assessment link. On the call right now, you cannot click this link. So either write it down, or at the end of this call, about around noon today, you will receive an automatically generated email that will include the link. So if you want to wait for that and just click it from your email, you are welcome to do that. But I do suggest just writing it down just in case. But as a reminder, you have until 5 o'clock to complete your assessment. Each WSC needs to complete their assessment individually. So if you're sitting in a conference room with a group of WSCs right now, please do not take that assessment as a group. You will not all receive credit. Each person gets their own certificate with their own name. And that certificate will be automatically emailed to you with your score and an official certificate with all the information you need to track for your continuing education credits. And the scoring rubric, you just need to get a 75% or higher, which comes out to getting 6 or more out of the 8 questions correct. So I'll leave this up here for you all to write down and to review. If you have any last minute questions or comments you want us to have, go ahead, send them to us. But without any other announcements or things, we are done for the day. I just wanted to say thank you to Karen and Linda and all of you for joining. I hope it was useful information. I hope that you all feel a little bit more comfortable when you're helping your clients and getting them ready for an emergency. And I hope that also you guys use this for your own personal preparedness as well. Everyone has their own families and their own needs. So I hope that we all can be a little bit better than the last emergency we went through. So thank you all and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.